It is Tuesday, the 6th of March. Good evening. My name is Michelle Ngele. Tonight, at least 1 trillion shillings worth of government expenditure cannot be accounted for, while more than 10 billion shillings of taxpayers' money has gone to waste. That is according to the Auditor General's report that covers the 2015-2016 financial year. Now, this means the government was only able to account for less than a third of its total expenditure. According to the report, White Elephant projects are to blame for the massive wastage in the country. Now, this huge waste is our big story tonight, and we invite you to join the conversation on Twitter. Our hashtag is The Big Story. All right, so let's take you straight to some of the cases of wastage that have been highlighted in that report by Auditor General Edward Ouko there. One of them is, of course, in the Kenya Police Service there, 2.2 billion shillings that is so far unaccounted for. This was in the Kenya Police helicopter that was called the Augusta Westland helicopter, which crashed just 4 months after purchase. Now, the helicopter should have been under warranty, but apparently no accident report was provided to facilitate compensation of the same. And we also have not had an explanation from the Ministry of Interior, especially of the Cabinet Secretary, as to the failure to release that accident report. So 2.2 billion shillings there gone to waste. In the Ministry of Defence, 1.5 billion shillings to begin with of money that was used to procure aircrafts from the Royal Jordanian Air Force there. Aircrafts were purchased for 1.5 billion shillings, but records indicate that 7 aircrafts have not been operational from the time they were procured. The purchase price, like mentioned, there is 1.5 billion shillings. Technical assistance for the same, as well as maintenance services for the aircraft, was billed at 1.2 billion shillings. Aircraft spare parts for the same were also put at a cost of 1.3 billion shillings. Now, despite 7 aircrafts not working, records show that the aircrafts were delivered, assembled and tested, but an inspection undertaken by the ministry's technocrats revealed a number of defects in the same aircraft. So 1.5 billion shillings already there in the Ministry of Defence. Let's move on to food processing. There are 416 million shillings lost in a food processing factory at the Kenya Barracks in Gilgil. This was in relation to the construction of a building there for food processing. The Defence Ministry was awarded another contract to the same contractor for civil works and the same factory at a tender of 30 million shillings. But an audit inspection of the site undertaken in June 2016 reveals the contractor abandoned the works, but a sum of 22 million shillings had already been paid to the contractor. We also have a loss of 373 million shillings there in food processing equipment, which is yet to be supplied to the Ministry of Defence. The equipment, however, had not been delivered by the time the audit inspection was being done, despite the farm having been paid the entire sum of that contract. Still in the Ministry of Defence there, 316.9 million shillings. This was because of single accommodation at Embakasi Garrison. But let's take a look at the Ministry of Agriculture there. 6.3 billion Kenyan shillings unaccounted for. This is in relation to loans for the Kendren Chemical and Fertilizer Company, a project that apparently never took off under the Ministry of Agriculture. The government guaranteed debts incurred in 1970 were advanced by governments of both Australia and Belgium. The total principal was about 5.4 billion shillings plus interest of an amount of 887 million shillings, both of which were fully repaid in the financial year 2014-2015. When we move on to the Ministry of Health there, we see a further loss of 463.3 million shillings. This is when the Ministry of Health awarded a contract to a local construction firm for the proposed upgrading of the Othaya District Hospital. That project has since stalled, but 463 million shillings set aside for the same project cannot be accounted for. Still still in the Ministry of Health, the Auditor General in this latest report has confirmed most of the allegations that 5 billion shillings was unaccounted for in the Afia House scandal. Moving on there to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we begin with the 516 million shillings unaccounted for. This is with regard to the construction of Chancery and High Commissioner's residence in Islamabad, Pakistan. This was estimated at a cost of 443 million shillings, and it was terminated after 3 revisions of the cost. But 1 billion shillings has since been spent on the renovation of 2 Kenyan embassies abroad, one which developed cracks soon after completion. And then we also have a further 289 million shillings that was lost. This was after the renovation of the Kenya House in Windhoek, Namibia. The building developed cracks soon after completion, despite taking 289 million Kenyan shillings. The Auditor General there also highlights cases of monies that cannot be accounted for within the National Youth Service there. Remember, this is for the financial year 2016-2017, 49 million shillings that wasn't accounted for. It was allegedly used for the construction of flats at an NYS Vocational Training Institute in industrial area. And we'll be discussing some of these cases. Let's take a look there at the prisons as well. Auditor General Edward Oko there further highlighting a further 122 million shillings that was to be used for the Kenya Prison Service biogas projects that have never been implemented to date. We also have the Meteorological Department, which has been highlighted in that same report. 11.5 million shillings unaccounted for. This was to be used by the Met Department to construct a model county office in Embu in the year 2009. Again, the project has since stalled, but 11 million shillings has since gone unaccounted. All right, and moving on to the judiciary now. Quite a few issues coming up for the judiciary. Begin with 118.3 million shillings that was to be used for the Nyamira Law Course, which was set to be constructed at that cost. Construction of the same is yet to be completed. And moving on there was also supposed to be the construction of the Nyando and Muhoroni Law Course at a further cost of 74.8 million shillings, as well as 74.9 million shillings respectively. This again a project that is behind schedule by about 30 weeks. Still within the judiciary, 814.9 million shillings. This was to be used for the construction of the Lodwar Law Courts, and that is a project that has since stalled, and it's stalled at only 27.7% completion. So just some of the issues there that have since been highlighted by Auditor General Edward Oko there. Now, in studio tonight for this conversation, we'll be speaking to Dr. Elizabeth Owiti, who is a lecturer of economics at the University of Nairobi. She'll also be speaking to Edwin Makori, Chief Executive Officer at the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, ISPAC. Mr. Makori is also the Secretary to the ISPAC Council. We shall also bring in Kwame Owino, Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Economic Affairs, as well as Felix Okach, a multilateral trade expert, who will be joining us by way of phone. But first, we'll cross over to Sophia Wanuna, our lead reporter here on The Big Story. Sophia is in Hurlingham engaging James Shikwati, an economist and director of the Inter-Region Economic Network. Sophia.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So tonight we are able to look at the numbers and figures released in the Auditor General's report, the financial year 2015-2016. And I'm joined by James Shikwati, who is an economist as well as the director of IREN, to talk more about just what we are witnessing from this report. Thank you for making time for The Big Story. So quite a number of figures we are seeing being thrown out there by the Auditor General as far as accountability. 40 billion not being accounted for, 1 billion from the presidency, apparently secret accounts, 8 billion Ministry of Interior. Does this shock you? Is this that something happens around the world when it comes to Auditor General reports? Because mostly we'll hear it's just because other agencies have not submitted various documents.
Yeah, I think for Kenya as a country that is seeking to develop and to become a middle-income economy, this report is very shocking. It's shocking because it depicts a leadership that is really not keen to bring the transformation that it talks about. Because if you don't seal leakages, even if it's a boat, it will sink. So what we are seeing here is a scenario where instead of driving the country forward, we are digging holes into our system.
Yeah, because one of the other things you realize from this report, we are seeing the question of recurrent expenditure. So a lot of the money is going to pay salaries, significant percentage. In fact, the biggest percentage is going to recurrent expenditure. Then there is the money that, of course, is going to pay the loans, the debts that we owe various entities. And then only 20% on development. That is of concern.
Yeah, what's going on here is the kind of political system that we have evolved since independence. You know, we have a political system where we are promising mwananchi that the government will do A, B, C, D. So what the government simply does is to hog as much as it can in the name of trying to help people without necessarily enabling the people to build the capability for development. So here is a case where you borrow a lot, but you don't develop. It's like you borrow money to go and party. So now it's a party session where, you know, you're borrowing money to pay salaries, but you're not borrowing money to build capability for people to produce more wealth so that we can repay our loans.
Yeah. But time and again, we've had governments reasoning around the borrowing and all this debt being towards development, that it's meant to spur development, that will feel the pinch now, but later on will be grateful. Do you see it that way, or is it miscalculated? Because already there is an issue with the uptake of cargo with the SGR.
Yeah. I mean, the point being that if you are borrowing for development, and you are wasting the borrowed money through leakages that the Auditor General cannot even explain, that cannot agree with the point that the borrowing is for development. Basically, the borrowing is mortgaging the future, making it difficult for Kenyans who will be there after us to be able to wriggle around the chains of those who are loaning Kenya money. That's why I'm saying that the approach is wrong, and we need to take this report seriously and really push Parliament to follow the money and tell us where the money is.
Yeah, because even before this, we saw the Auditor General raising the red flag on the Eurobond that was earlier fielded. And to date, there are still questions around that. And yet again, we saw the CS going for another Eurobond tour. So again, Kenya successful in getting that one. Do you share concerns that, because even IMF, there was a bit of a sputter and lack of clarity on what really is going on. Had IMF pulled back because of Kenya not bringing her debt down as was the deal earlier. So here we have another Eurobond. Do you see us getting in the same problems we were in before?
Well, what's happening is that when you see international institutions giving a warning, it means that we've missed something in our approach. Of course, for the IMF, they were very clear that that was not a loan. It was just a facility that was to ensure Kenya with, as far as foreign reserves are concerned. But I think what Kenyans are witnessing, what I can see from these leakages, is a situation where we have now many friends who can give Kenya money, and the old friends who used to restrict giving money by pegging loans or aid to some kind of standards. I think the standards are evaporating. Now, whether West or East, they are willing to pump in money. So I think we are witnessing a scenario where those with money are competing to pour as much money as possible as a way of capturing the country. And unfortunately, the political leadership don't see that, because for them, they simply want to get as much as they can without looking at what does it mean for geopolitical positioning of this country vis-a-vis the region.
Yeah. This month marks 5 years since Kenya got into the devolved system of governance. And looking at this Auditor General's report, expenditure, 88% national government, only 12% at the county level. And the Auditor General speaks to because what is being used is audited accounts from the past 3 years of financial years, so that we're not using up-to-date accounts so that counties can, in effect, get more money. Isn't that an extremely lopsided, if you like, approach in as far as the money going to 47 county governments?
No, basically what you're looking at here is a competition between the national government and the devolved government. And we've seen the tug of war even in the health sector, where it was supposed to be a devolved system, but the national government was busy procuring equipment, saying they're going to send them to the county government. So I think here it's a symptom of lack of goodwill for the national government to support the devolved system. I think what I can see here is an attempt to reduce the county governments into the old system of provincial system, where the governor does not have enough power. It is just there as an administrator. So I think by denying the counties money or reducing their ability to partake of the national cake, as it were, we are slowing down development, because the original idea about counties was to have them as hubs of development. And national government coordinates these hubs. But what we see is the national government trying to be a super hub without having the county governments do their proper role.
Yeah. A Kenyan watching this tonight, hearing about 40 billion shillings that cannot be accounted for, will ask about, what about accountability? That in fact, if there are people misappropriating money, taxpayers' hard-earned money, what happens to them? What do you tell that kind of a person?
I think for the Kenyan, I would just tell them what normally happens to the street when somebody pickpockets another's money. You'll always see Kenyans rushing to administer mob justice. But unfortunately, the same Kenyan, when it comes to politicians stealing money, they cheer the politician. So we have a situation where it's difficult to understand the psychology of the Kenyans. But of concern to me here, people are facing hunger, starvation. I think Red Cross said close to 1.6 million. Mm-hmm. And here you go, the government will be asking donors to help Kenya feed the hungry people, while the politicians are taking all the money away.
Wow. Thank you very much for your perspectives and insights tonight with us here on The Big Story. Michelle, back to you.
All right, so many things. That is Sophia Wanuna there speaking to an economist. The big story tonight is the massive wastage of public resources in what has been termed as white elephant projects in the country. Something that, of course, kickstarts a conversation in the country of the entire public expenditure. Let's now bring in Elizabeth Owiti, who is a lecturer of economics at the University of Nairobi. She is joining us live from our city centre studios. Many thanks for joining us tonight, Elizabeth. It is unacceptable for such huge amounts of monies to go unaccounted for, considering these are public resources. But the Auditor General's office has been very consistent in providing details of, seemingly plunder of public resources in the country. Many times these reports have gone, basically unacted upon. What do you make of this latest report?
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. This report actually is just repeating what the Auditor General has been telling us over the last several years. And it's actually shocking still, because we are in the market looking for more money, but we don't seem to be using the money that we have appropriately. So we are increasing the debt burden and going to the very expensive markets to get the loans. So at the end of it all, we are overburdening Kenyans, because the Kenyans have to pay the taxes. And it's because it's from our taxes that the loan is going to be repaid. So it's very it's, it's, it's actually very sad that the government is not able to account to the citizens how their taxes have been used.
All right, and of course, I mean, from an economics point of view, even as you bring that in, there's been many voices, some informed, some misinformed of how this can affect the country's economy. But let's consider that Kenya has just secured its second Eurobond, despite the fact that an audit is still ongoing on the first Eurobond that we took. Many say it is questionable the delay that the Office of the Auditor General has taken to bring forth that report. But let's focus on that Eurobond alone. I mean, we had offers of up to 14 billion, I believe, and Kenya took just about 200 billion shillings for the country. So some would say then that the country isn't in such a bad place in terms of investor confidence.
Thank you, Michelle. When we look at the Eurobond, the reason why we are raising more interest is because of the cost of the loan. Because when we go to the market to raise the bonds, we are using the capital, the banks or the market rates. And then the market rates are much, much higher. The repayment period is short, so the grace period is also very short. So at the end of it all, the people expressing interest to give us the loan are doing that because they know that they are going to benefit. And
right,
then in terms of accountability of the earlier Eurobond, when it takes so long for the Auditor General to actually audit and give the report, it means that the government actually failed to account for how the money was used. Because if they account and give evidence of the expenditure, then the Auditor General can actually easily track the investments, the flow of money, and be able to give us a report. So I think it is a failure on the government side, not necessarily the Auditor General.
All right, all right. So we'll come back to you in just a moment. Now, the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, ISPAC, has also sounded a warning of Kenya's ballooning debt, now at 56% of the country's gross domestic product. Now, this means that each Kenyan would need to cash out about 100,000 shillings in order to settle a bill that has surpassed 4.5 trillion shillings by the end of 2017. Well, here now is Julius Mwatu, chairman of the ISPAC Council. Let's listen in.
The budget policy statement 2018-2019 reflects an expected financing gap, and this has been the case, I think, over the years. You know that the government has financed the capital projects using debt, and the expectation of the 2018-2019 budget is we're also going to have a financing gap, which of course then implies that we are likely to be taking additional debt.
The debt levels that we see now are still manageable in terms of the level. What we are concerned about is the flow of new debt. I mean, so the trajectory is going to a place where it will not be sustainable anymore and where you will get into trouble eventually.
All right, so let's go back to Elizabeth Thowiti, lecturer of economics at the University of Nairobi, still joining us from our city center studio. So we're seeing here firms like the International Monetary Fund as well as ISPAC really sounding a warning to Kenyans in terms of the debt crisis and the government's appetite for new loans if checked. But the government in its defense says this, loans are being taken from large infrastructural projects that in the long term will be beneficial to Kenyans. But what does the country have to do to assure investors that the country really will get itself out of this quagmire?
Hello?
Yes, Elizabeth, if you can hear me, we've seen the International Monetary Fund there issuing another warning to Kenyans on the ballooning debt. How do you think then we need to tread in terms of fiscal consolidation to get the country out of this trap?
Yes, I think the IMF and other financing institutions are warning Kenyans because our debt burden is actually increasing very fast, and yet the expected returns might not be as planned. This is because we have gone to the market. We remember we're talking about the Eurobond, which is actually getting loan from the market using the financial rates. And the financial rates are normally much more expensive than if we get the loan from the IMF and the World Bank, which is the concessionary loan, in which we get to pay a lower interest rate. Sometimes it is interest-free, and we are given a longer grace period over which to repay the money. So when we get to the market and get the market rates, the repayment period is short and the interest rate is very high. When the interest rate is high, the loan becomes very expensive. And so sometimes the cost of the loan is much, much higher than the returns on the investment. Like what we are saying, we are putting the money on the infrastructure. But if the cost of the loan is very high, then it is going to crowd out, what we call crowding out the returns from the infrastructure. And then secondly, when we are getting the loan and we are investing on infrastructure, the cost of investment, if you look at efficiency in terms of how the loan is being used, to what extent are we efficiently using the loan on infrastructure? Because we have seen cases where there is a lot of inflation on the cost of the infrastructure. This, again, increases the cost of investment and then the cost of servicing the loan. Then the other thing is what the Auditor General's report is telling us, that actually part of the money that we are getting on loan that we as Kenyans are going to be repaying is not being used for the intended purposes. And so we could be saying that we are getting loan for infrastructure, but that loan is not used for infrastructure. And so there's no way out we are going to get the return from infrastructure. So it will force the government to actually expand the tax base so that we are taxed more, or to go back to the market and get loan to pay that loan. So you are going to be borrowing from this bank to pay this bank, and it is a continuous process that in the end weakens our institutions in terms of attraction of foreign direct investment in Kenya, because when development partners or investors look at us and realize that we are not strong in terms of our liquid base, then they look at alternative countries to invest in. So that reduces direct foreign investment. Secondly, the other problem is that when we have to repay the loan, then there is a constraint in the liquidity, because currently we are paying 40% of the money that the government is getting from the citizens as our tax revenue is being paid. We are using that to pay the loans. But as we increase the amount of loans that we are getting from the market, then it means that the amount of money that we are going to be repaying is also continuously increasing. So that destabilizes the economy. Then the other problem that we are having is we are going to the market, international market. The international market, normally when there are any international shocks, then the country financial stability and economic growth will be significantly affected. So it is better actually to get the concessional loans at a lower rate and then pay over a long-term period than going to the market to get the Eurobond.
All right, well, we'll come back to you in just a moment, Elizabeth. Let's bring in Felix Okach, who is a multilateral trade expert. He is joining us by way of phone. Felix, good evening. Now, we spoke about 2 weeks ago, and you seemed to go against the warnings that the International Monetary Fund has been sounding to Kenyans. And I mean, since then, Kenya has been able to weather a downgrade by credit rating agency Moody's. It has also been able to weather the loss of access to loans, rather, by IMF. But market participants still say the country needs a credible plan to tackle its fiscal deficit. How do we do this? All right, so we're now speaking on phone to Felix Okach, who is a multilateral trade expert. Felix, good evening. Can you hear me? All right, so I will be getting back to Felix Okach in just a moment. Felix, good evening. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, so we've just been speaking to Elizabeth Fawiti there, and she brings in credible issues. The very fact that the Auditor General keeps releasing reports that show monies that cannot be accounted for then raises questions in the minds of Kenyans as to why we keep on taking these very large loans. That being said, Kenya has still been able to weather this storm from a downgrade in the credit rating to the denial of a loan by IMF. But market experts still say there is need for a definitive plan to weather Kenya's fiscal deficit. Where do we begin with that?
Thank you very much for calling me in. And I've listened to other speakers on that matter. But what you must know that any time you're doing a long-term project, you borrow. Even when you buy a house or a car, you borrow. So the government has borrowed for long-term projects, things like a railway, the road, the power system, and the whole lot. So those ones you can use the current money you're getting for current consumption. Now, Kenya, from the other one perspective, we see from us we collect enough to pay for current expenses and leave a little for development. But now we are borrowing for development. These are long-term things. And going by the principle of present value of money, it is better to borrow now and pay later, because the value of projects, you see them over time, not immediately. That's one thing. And then two, we are mixing the ordinary wastage through the auditor's report and the borrowing. Because borrowing Kenya is credit-worthy. For us to go, Moody's to give us low down rating, those are some agencies, national agencies, and then you go out and borrow, get even more than you want, it means that you are credit-worthy. That's one. In financial terms going forward, World Bank tends to give reforms, the guide on other countries, the way it was formed, it was to guide countries on leveling on interest rates, on leveling of forex issues, when the countries have balance support difficulties, the World Bank used to come in. But over time, things have changed. You remember during Kibaki's time, we had enough, we are not even borrowing from the World Bank. During Moyo's time, we are borrowing from the World Bank. So now, methods of borrowing are more. There is China, there are also international markets, so we can borrow as we are doing it and doing the projects required. The only challenge we have is the wastage. And the wastage, we're not wasting the borrowed money. We're wasting the local money we've collected. When you see governors, MPs waste money, this is our taxes, which we are wasting. So that's the challenge we have. But let us not mix the borrowing, long-term, and the short-term challenges. On the whole,
Felix, maybe just to interrupt you there, you seem to say the money we're wasting is not the money we're borrowing, and this comes in the wake of the audit on the first Eurobond still ongoing, which has definitely raised questions as to why it has taken so long. There has been many allegations of mismanagement of the first Eurobond alone. How sure can you be that money that is being borrowed is not being misappropriated?
Our sources of money are local and borrowed money. You get me there?
Right.
The local money, that's what you're saying, the MC, the county government, the government scenario, all that is locally and being wasted is the local money we have. So we are wasting our money. But most of the borrowed money, it's on projects. You've seen the railway. You've seen the road network, the China road. You've seen other power systems. In as much as the challenges, we are borrowing for a long term. You can never build a house or buy a car without borrowing. It's only that there's wastage.
Right, so you don't think the country is in a bad place as is being warned by the International Monetary Fund?
If the country was in a bad place, we would have not got international borrowers lending us more than we wanted. That's one. If we were in a bad place, we would have not had countries like China system doing the railways. If we are not in a bad place, these fellows would not be coming and reporting on what's happening in the country. World Bank was formed to assist countries in terms of budget support and forex. But now Kenya is far better than that level. For example, if you talk of foreign currency, even we don't get from the World Bank borrowing, we have exports for flowers, coffee, VAT and remittances. Kenyans abroad bring a lot of money. So in terms of foreign currency, we are not as bad as it seems.
All right, many thanks. That is Felix Okachi. He's a multilateral trade expert. We'll be joining him later on by way of phone, bringing us to a break here on the big story. Massive wastage in the country's public expenditure is the focus on the big story tonight. The hashtag is the big story. Just stay with us.